everyone, and welcome to Coffee Break and Parenting Talk. I'm your host, Mia Clarice, and today I am really excited to chat with Holly Storm. Let me introduce Holly to you. Holly Storm with Harmony Parenting is a certified parenting coach who guides parents to use children's volatile emotion as the key to unlock the path to connection and calm. She lives in Denver with her husband and two adoring sons who are 11 and 7. When she is in parenting or coaching, she is working to spread the skill of compassionate listening to teens, teachers, and parents to prevent teen suicide, alcohol, and drug use. Holly is a certified parenting coach, certified life coach, and nonviolent communication facilitator. Welcome, Holly. It is so great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I am very excited to, be having this parent talk with you. We've chatted a few years ago, and I really feel like I'm grateful that our paths have crossed because I love the path that you're on and the concept that you're sharing. I'm a big fan of nonviolent communication. And, just any way that we try to connect with our kids and with ourselves and find a healthy way for communication and parenting. So thank you for being here.
Yeah,
I,
for sure.
I love what in your bio you say that the work that you do is spreading the skill of compassionate listening to parents and to teens to prevent teen suicide, alcohol, and drug use. And this is such an important topic because it really feels like all the work that we're doing in the early years with our kids is to help them, have a healthy teenage years and healthy adulthood. So that work is so important. But I wanted to ask you, how does this work help prevent those issues in the teenage years? But before I do that, I'd love to ask you, how did you come into the work that you do? What attracted you into the work of, communication and compassionate parenting and, the work that you do?
Yeah, so I think I've always had a curiosity around communication and around why some people get along and other people don't, and what happens when there's like these disconnects and rifts, and then how do people come back together? I I remember from a very, very young age, observing my family and just holding a lot of curiosity around all of these different pieces. And then moving into junior high, I was trying to figure out why some kids were so mean to the teachers and the adults. And
Mm.
then some kids decided to use drugs and run away and all kinds of things. And so I really held open a curiosity and an understanding with all of these different kids in different behaviors. I had a lot of friends with a lot of different experiences and just kept my ears open. So when I became a parent, I knew that I wanted to parent differently from my parents and started doing a ton of research and found myself actually going down the exact same path they went down, just out of that was what was ingrained in me. It was my innate habit. It's what felt normal to my body, even though after I reacted in a certain way and created shame or hurt with my child, I felt really, really shameful. I felt so guilty and bad. And it's like, I wasn't going to do this. Like, I am here to parent differently. I was so determined.
Mm.
And just, it was not coming together like how to actually make that change. And it wasn't until really I got coaching that I learned what inside of me was preventing me from making all of those changes that I wanted to make.
Mm.
Um, so going back to that, really what I learned was that it's the spiritual connection between the
Mm.
parent and the child. And that's what was missing between myself and my parents. And going into your other question about how this prevents some of those behaviors as teenagers, when children feel spiritually connected to themselves, as well as to the important adults in their lives, they don't have a need for these other behaviors. They're
Mm,
willing to listen more. They're willing to learn. They still have a need for experimentation. That's part of the teenage brain, right? They need to
yeah.
go experiment, but they also feel safer saying no when things aren't quite right for them. And that's not to say that they're
Mm,
always going to be perfect kids or always going to say no and they're never going to try alcohol. That won't necessarily be the case.
yeah.
It does mean that if they get themselves into trouble, they will feel safe coming to you. And even when they're making the consideration, they have more ground to stand on if they do
Mm.
want to say no, if things don't feel right to them.
Wow. That seems like a very important point, to because the goal is not like to never let them try anything or have the expectation that they would never lie or they would never try that, but to know that they might experiment, they might make bad choices sometimes, but then they come back to that connection. And I love what you said about just the importance of that spiritual connection, because I feel like that's part of what I also like believe in. That's why I call my classes that I'm doing right now is parenting without disconnection, because it does feel like having that disconnection is really at the root of a lot of behavioral problems, a lot of addiction, a lot of trauma, a lot of suffering. So yeah, I love that. Can you talk a little bit about um just the normal, um not normal, but like the common parenting ways that are causing that separation? Because I saw on your website you talk a little bit about how modern parenting is creating that separation, and we're really not meant to parent our kids through separation. We're really not meant to parent them through fear and punishment. But for a lot of parents, especially because, like you said, this is how we were parented, it feels like, oh, this is just how parents are supposed to be. They're supposed to be strict. They're supposed to set boundaries. We're supposed to make kids afraid or scared, like almost as if this is the only way they will learn right from wrong, right from wrong. But I think what you're saying is that we're not necessarily meant to parent that way. This is not natural.
Yeah. Yeah. From the research I've done, a lot of that has come to us through the whole many other things that are power over of
Mm-hmm.
colonialism that lead through fear, that lead through having separation, having one person valued more than another.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is that the human brain can't actually learn and can't actually feel safe to respond in a loving way when it's full of fear. So
Mm-hmm.
when we're coming to our kids with this power over dynamic where it's I'm right, you're wrong, you need to do what I say. I I set all of the rules, and if you don't want to do what I say, it's my job to create fear so that you will change your ways. When
Mm,
we come with that energy, we're putting our children in a place where they actually cannot grow and they cannot do what we're asking because they're in a position that they really
mm,
need to protect themselves. Their poor,
mm,
tender little hearts just are so scared that they have to protect themselves, and that will result in more screaming, more tantrums,
mm,
all types of behavior that we don't want. And they'll be doing things that we've asked them not to do because they're seeking connection. They're not getting the bucket of connection filled,
mm.
and they're not sure how to do that. So a lot of times they do that by pushing our buttons and
Right.
saying, okay, at least I'm getting some attention. It's not
Yeah.
really meeting my need for connection, but at least I'm getting some
Kidding.
attention. So
Right.
instead, when we can approach them, and really the way I look at it is they want to contribute to us. We are their life source for survival. They
Mm,
can't access food and shelter and love and all of these wonderful things that they need to grow as a human. They cannot access those without us, their parents. So they want to please us.
mm,
And our job is to figure out what's getting in the way.
what's getting in the way? So what is getting in the way of the kids? Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. You say in also I saw like on your website you wrote that all kids' behavior is because of some kind of needs that they need. So what are some of those needs that the kids are seeking in those, early years that maybe we're not meeting those needs?
Yeah. So kids need a level of certainty. So
Mm,
things like telling them what's going to happen before it happens, making sure they
mm,
know the schedule for today, letting them know, even with a very small child that's pre-verbal, talking to them, letting them know what you're doing. Hey, I'm going to pick you up before we pick them up. I'm going to
mm,
take you to change your diaper. I'm going to lay you down. So really annotating what we're doing, or with an older child, with our family at ages 7 and 11, we sit down together and have a family meeting every week. We print out a calendar so the kids know what to expect every day. And then, especially with the 7-year-old, I review it each day. This is when you can expect to have
mm,
screen time. This is the car we're taking to school. This will be the rhythm today, so that they can
mm,
have an expectation of what's going to happen. So, one of their needs is certainty and order. Another is just the opposite, is having variety and novelty and play and experimentation. And that's truly a human need at every age of life. And
right.
children need it even more than adults because they're growing so rapidly. And so they need that freedom, especially if they can get it outdoors in nature, to just really experiment and grow and play, and maybe even pretend play things that they've seen so they can learn social cues and that kind
Mm,
of thing. So those are two of the biggest needs. And then there's always these little things that come up. And I know in my family, it's often things like being hungry or a need to pee that can create some of the biggest tantrums, because the kids
right.
just aren't in tune with themselves yet, and they need me as their adult to help them figure that out. What is going on that you really need inside
Wow.
before you can be a compassionate human being again.
Right. So in those moments when they come and they have those needs and then, that influences their behavior, but then we use separation or punishment or, just respond to the behavior, we're not acknowledging the need that's they have underneath that behavior, then that can lead to more problems because now the kid feel like, oh, my need was not met. And and now you're punishing me for it. So I feel bad. And that can lead to all sorts of issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is really where we start creating layer upon layer of problem. Because one, they still have that original need, it doesn't go away.
Mm.
And now they're feeling shamed for having a need.
Mm.
And when they start feeling shamed for having a need, then they start to feel unworthy.
Mm.
And when kids don't feel worthy, we all know that a confident kid is a more pleasant child to be around. So this actually rips away at their confidence when we're punishing their behaviors, because we're not helping them to become in tune with their needs. So our job as the parent is to actually teach them to listen to their bodies, to understand, okay, what is this need that's happening inside of you, so they can gain responsibility. That's really what responsibility is understanding what's happening in here, so
Mm.
that we can meet our own needs and then respond compassionately to other people.
Right. Yeah, that does make sense a lot. So, since communication is one of the biggest way that we can connect our children, I mean, I know that in parenting, like every time I works with parents, you almost cannot talk about parenting, I feel like, without talking about communication, because this is how we This is how we parent, is through how we communicate with our children. So can you, like, for someone who's never heard of what is nonviolent communication, what is NVC? That's the acronym, NVC, nonviolent communication. Can you tell us a little bit about what does that stand for and how is it different from other, forms of communication?
Sure. So nonviolent communication came out of, it was developed by Marshall Rosenberg, but some of his teachers were Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. And it came out of the nonviolent protest movement. And
Mm,
Marshall Rosenberg, through his psychology, he was a psychologist and he had
yeah.
studied under Carl Jung. So he already had this other basis of looking at a human's needs. And then he combined that with a lot of the ideas of nonviolent protest. So where you're not harming others.
Mm,
So that's really what nonviolent communication means. It means that we're using words, we're choosing words that will not create harm to ourselves or others. So an example of that would be the word should that Marshall Rosenberg describes as one of the most violent words in our language because it
yeah.
creates this expectation around how we should be responding, but we are a human body and
Yeah.
we may or may not be having the feelings and experience that we should.
That's funny
So
because a
that's
lot
an,
of time I'm like, I should do this. Like I'm having and my husband, he loves communication. He's like, do you really? Should you? It's, yeah, that is so true. Should is it doesn't feel good.
yeah, yeah. So when we're using that language with our kids,
Mm,
they're feeling lesser. Again, we're taking away from their self-confidence.
mm,
Our job is to build them up. So some of the ways that nonviolent communication does that is by using positive action language. And you may have heard the saying that you can't do a don't. So often
mm.
as parents, we're saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't touch, don't hit your brother. You can't do a don't. So we're
Right.
helping
What are
children
we
to
supposed to do?
understand what to do.
Right. What am I supposed to? Okay, I don't do this. So now what?
Yeah.
Right. So use
Yeah.
more like tell them what to do instead.
Yes. And I'm
Or
glad that you voiced it that way because when we tell kids what to do, a lot of times that comes as a demand.
mm,
With this energy, even if it's not the way we intend, we hold this energy of, I know more than you do. And this is what you need to do.
mm,
And when we come to children with that, we're not honoring their humanity, their
mm,
autonomy. All of us want choice. And that is part of being human is really wanting choice.
mm,
If we're not honoring that they're a human being that makes choices, even if sometimes they're choices that we don't like, then they're much less likely to do what we want. So
mm,
nonviolent communication helps us to voice this instead as a request instead of a
mm,
demand, honoring that the child has choice. However, if we really want them to do what we want them to do, we can also say what's so alive in our hearts. Why is this so incredibly important to us?
mm,
So that they can connect to us. Because again, children naturally, even as infants, want to contribute to their adults, since the adults are their biggest resource for survival in life. So we help them to understand why this is so important to us. Again, not in a shaming way. We're helping them to understand that in a very positive way. This is how you can contribute to me. This is how you can contribute to life's beauty. And then often they do what we want, not always, and when they don't, it's because they are meeting another need. There's something
mm,
else inside of them that is a need that's deep inside of them and is more important than what we're asking them to do.
mm. Right. There's always a need, whether they are agreeing to do or what we want them to do or not. There's always a need. So, okay. So I love that. You mentioned that it is we in nonviolent communication, we don't use like violent words, like should use more positive actions because we can't do a don't. And giving them a choice. So we're not demanding them, here's what to do, but really giving them a choice. So can you give an example of what would that nonviolent communication look like in parenting, for example?
Sure, sure. I'll use this example of my son not clearing away his dishes from the table.
Okay. That's
So
a typical one.
yeah, right. He was
Yeah.
leaving his plate and his bowl from cereal and whatever, and he'd just walk away, moving on to the next thing.
Mm,
And at one point, I decided that I wanted to have a conversation about it with him because it was important to me to have cleanliness and order in the
mm,
kitchen. I didn't want the food to dry on the dishes. And I wanted him to build this skill so that when he becomes an adult, he's not a slob. So um, those were the things that were important to me. And when we sat down and talked about it, I said, well, these are the things that are important to me. And he actually said, yeah, Mom, I know. I'm like, okay, then why aren't you clearing your dishes? And he's like, well, I'm not totally sure why I'm not clearing my dishes. And so we sat, and this was actually during COVID. We sat and we thought about it, and we kind of started going through some of his needs. What needs are being met for you by not clearing your dishes? Some need is
mm,
being met for you. And even if I had asked him right there, hey, will you clear your dishes? He'd say no, and he'd walk away. And I was like, okay, so what need is it that's being met? And for him, again, during COVID, he didn't have much choice around things. We were stuck in
mm,
the house. We didn't have play groups. We didn't have ways to connect to friends. There were so many needs that were going unmet. It was one way, one
mm,
very small way for him to feel independent. And
mm,
being a preteen, that was an incredibly important thing for him to feel was independent.
mm.
So I said, okay, so you're meeting your need for independence and choice by actively not clearing your dishes when I ask you to. And I was like, okay, this is dishes, not drugs. Like I can take that. I get it as your parent, and I will understand
Right.
why why you're not doing this. So I cleared his dishes. And it was interesting because over the coming weeks, I would say, hey, will you clear your dishes? No. Okay, I get it. You need some independence. And I would clear his dishes. And at some point that changed. I would
Mm.
say, hey, will you clear your dishes? And he's like, oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
But it was because I wasn't putting any pressure on him to change. I wasn't making a demand of him. It was a request every time I requested. And we had this understanding, okay, whether you say yes or whether you say no, you're an independent human being making your own choices. And it really gave him that room that when he was ready to, he could contribute to me by actually doing what I asked.
Wow. That is, I think this is such a great story and such an important one because I think a lot of time for parents in similar situation would feel if the child like refuses, if I sat down, I talked with him compassionately, I tried to understand what's going on and they still refuse to do it. I think some parents would feel like, oh my gosh, my kid would never learn to take care of their dishes. And this is, they're going to be adults, in their dorm room or in their first apartment, leaving dishes everywhere. But when you actually gave him space to figure it out, when you realize that that is the need he's having, he just, found it on its own. And it's really interesting that you mentioned the story because it reminds me when I was growing up, a teenager, and my mom would ask me to clean my room. And she'd tell, like, today I want you to clean your room. And I would say, okay, I'll do it. But then, maybe it's 3 in the afternoon and I haven't done it yet. I just didn't feel that motivation. And then she would come and she would clean it for me. And I would get so upset or she would tell me to do it now. And I always had that feeling growing up that I never wanted to do something that someone else wants me to do. Like it
Mm-hmm.
had to come from within me But then I never felt that my mom was patient enough. Like, imagine if she just waited the whole day. I probably would have cleaned it myself, but she never waited. And I always was so frustrated. Like, I always felt that frustration because I just didn't have, I wanted more time. It's like, I'll do it, but I'll do it on my own terms. So I'm really grateful that you shared that story, because I think for a lot of parents, I know my mom had those fears. It's like, you're not going to do it. If you haven't done it now, you're not going to do it, and you need to do it now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's one thing I like about NVC. So NVC actually has a structure. It's feelings, needs,
Mm,
and requests.
right.
Observations, neutral observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And so it gives us a structure to look
Mm,
at these different situations. And had I not recognized what my son's needs were, I
mm,
probably wouldn't have had that patience. But having that
mm,
understanding
mm,
gave me a sense of calm and groundedness for this is what's happening, this is what's going on inside of him, and
right.
allowed me to have more spaciousness within myself. It also honored what I needed. Like, I
Mm,
need order, and understanding that I want to contribute to my son and his independence that he has no other way of expressing since it's COVID. I will go ahead and clean up his dishes. And that's
right.
going to be my choice. And so I came to cleaning up his dishes from a place of compassionate choice as well, compassion for myself, because I wanted that order and cleanliness. It wasn't from this
Mm,
place, well, oh, he won't do it, so I have to, which has a completely
right.
different energy to it. So it
Right.
really allowed me to connect with myself and connect with him, honor everyone's needs. And
Mm,
then, like you said, give him that space
mm,
to not do what he's told, to rebel, and then contribute when he was ready.
right.
Oh, you were talking about how parents often rush into that. And one quick tip for parents
Mm,
is that when you make a request, to count to 15 before saying anything else. And
mm,
I actually learned that tip, I don't know, when my kiddo was an infant, from another mom who has a podcast, and I'm not thinking of the name of it right now. The Baby Wise Mom, The Chronicles of the Baby Wise Mom was the name of the podcast way
okay.
back in 2011. And she said, just wait for 15 seconds.
Mm,
And what a difference that has made in my life of waiting for a
mm.
child to respond, because I've found, and I've noticed this because we have a puppy and I've been training him to come when
Oh
called.
my gosh.
And I'm so quick to correct. It's like, oh, you
Mm,
didn't do it yet. I'm going to make the demand again. I'm going to make the demand again. I'm going to make the demand again. Whereas if I just count to
mm,
15 and find some groundedness and spaciousness, it's like, oh, it takes kids time to process. They're not adults yet. They need to process our words, maybe process coming away from whatever activity they were doing.
mm.
Come to a place where they can figure out what's going on, and then they can respond.
Right. Well, that's a good tip. I think I sometimes I'm that way with my husband. It's not just kids who cannot process quickly. Even my husband sometimes like, just give me a moment to like think about it or process what you just said. I'm like, well, now what? Now what?
Yeah,
So this is a
same.
great reminder. Count to 15. So I'm just wondering, like, what would you do in a situation where, for example, you want to honor your need and it is not something that um like you're not really okay with a child not doing what you're asking them to do? Does that ever happen? Like, is there a situation where you feel I really need you to do this? You know, maybe you're a single mom, for example, and can't do it on your own and you really need that help. Like, what would you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, it's interesting because so many times our culture has brought us to this place where we believe that we need something that
Mm,
or we need our child to do something. That's not always the strategy. So anything that's based on a person, time, action, location, or object. I know that was quick. We call it Plato in NVC. So it's person, location, action, time, or object. That's a strategy.
Mm.
So if I'm asking for my child to do something specific, that's a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
My need is deeper down than that. What need do I really have? So I'd go back and figure out what is my need that would be being met by that strategy. And once I figure out that need, I have the world at my fingertips.
Mm.
Marshall Rosenberg talks about it as if we're set on a certain strategy, it's just a lack of creativity.
Mm.
A creative tragedy or something like that. He describes it as,
Mm.
because truly the world is at our fingertips and we have so many different options. Once we figure out what that need is, it never has to be one specific strategy. And I will say there is one exception to that rule, and that is in the case of our children's safety and our
Mm.
safety, frankly. You know, if a small child is running out into the street, it is completely okay to go and block the child,
Mm.
right? You don't
Yeah.
let them run out in the street, especially if there's a car coming or something like
Yeah.
that. So we need to, you know, keep our wits about us of what is truly for safety.
Mm.
For example, I've had parents say that they won't let their children climb up the slide, even if there's nobody else at the park, because it's unsafe to climb up a slide. They don't want them to learn that that's okay behavior in case someday somebody else is coming down the slide at the same time.
Mm.
And in my opinion, I take a very different view of that. You know, if nobody else is at the park, go use the equipment however you want to use it. And if there are other people at the park, we will negotiate that and I'll help you in those situations to keep everybody safe.
Mm.
It's still playground equipment to be played with freely in any way. There's no rules around playground equipment. The key
Right.
is we need to keep everybody safe, and that is our responsibility as adults.
Mm-hmm.
So I will intervene at that time. We will work it out at that time, and you'll learn some skills in
Right.
communication and negotiation and social skills when we work that out.
Right. So intervene when there is like a real threat, when safety is at stake. But in most situations, it's just a strategy, and we need to look deeper into what the need is. Once we find our needs, then we'll there's a lot more creativity into finding a solution and how to work with it.
Absolutely. And there's more authentic expression. So when I talk to my kiddo, I am say, hey, will you go put your shoes away? They're in the middle of the floor and somebody could trip on them. He'll roll his eyes and be like, and may or may not do it. But if I talk to my kiddo and I say, I know dad's coming home from work soon, and I want to make sure that he's safe when he comes in the door. He may not look down, and there's a chance he could trip over your shoes. Will you make sure your shoes are put away so that wherever you
Mm.
want to find him in the morning, will you put your shoes there in a place that keeps all of us safe? They're more likely to do it. Or if I say, hey,
Right.
will you come help with dinner? They're unlikely to say yes. But if I say, hey, I'm really tired and I need some support tonight,
Mm.
would you mind setting the table for us? They're much more likely to say yes because they really
Right.
hear my humanity. What are
Mm.
my needs? Like, I'm not unfalterable, or I'm a human that has needs, and
We're
I
just
go
like
up and down. I'm
robots.
not
We
this
can do
perfect
it all.
person. Yeah, exactly.
Right, right. So really changing how we ask them, how we request their support, and just being human, communicating our needs. So I heard you mention two things. We're acknowledging the child's needs, and we're also acknowledging our own needs and communicating that to them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then when they say no, or if they say no, a lot of times when we are truly communicating authentically from our heart, they will say yes.
Mm.
However, there will be times that they say no. So when they say no, going back to, okay, is my child the right strategy for this?
Mm,
Or is there something deeper in me that I haven't realized that I need? Or
mm.
what are their needs? So going back to, okay, wait, what are their needs? Saying no and addressing those needs. Like maybe I've asked my child to turn off the video game and come to dinner.
I was going to ask you about that because I think like video games are like one of the most challenging things that a lot of parents have.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're designed
They're
to
designed
not
to
turn
keep their
off.
attention. So how do you, so yeah, so like even if they have a
Right.
need to play, but how do you do when you have a competing, um, something that's competing with their attention?
Yeah. Yeah. So in that case, well, especially with digital devices, I always say begin with the end in mind. So that's just one of the parenting hacks that I use is before we turn it on, we talk about the strategy for turning it off because
Mm,
I know that that's a place that can be hard.
mm,
Um, so we go into it with that expectation that there's going to be this ending point, that it may not be a convenient and comfortable time. And they already know that. We've already had that discussion. But even if we don't, I might go to them and say, hey, it's time for dinner. Give them some choice, knowing they need choice, knowing they need
mm,
um, to have their own authenticity, their own experience. And they're in the middle of play. They're in the middle of something that's really important to them.
right, right.
Okay, so if you were to choose your point of where to turn this off, what do you want to finish before you turn it off?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times it's not just based on time.
Right.
It's
Like
based
they're in a
on,
specific match or there's something,
yeah,
the task that they need to complete to earn their points or,
exactly.
yeah.
And so I let them have that choice. Okay, do you want it to be a time choice or do you want it to be that you accomplish something specific? And wait, what if you don't accomplish it within, like, I'm willing to allow up to 5 minutes. Can it be accomplished within that amount of time?
Mm,
And then if they say yes, then we're in agreement and sit there and be with them.
yeah.
Help them turn it off when they get to that point. Because frankly, I don't expect most kids. My computer is dimming, so I'm plugging it in. I don't expect most kids to be able to say, "Oh yeah, I achieved this. Now I can turn it off," because they're it's I don't know, it's just like candy. It's like a drug. It triggers so many good feelings,
Right.
hormones in the brain. Like who wants to turn that off? It's too hard. So being there with them, okay, I see that you completed it. Helping them to stay accountable to that, to themselves.
Mm,
It's important to us to have a family meal and have that connection with you. Oh, it is? Like I'm important? Yeah, yeah, you're really important. So it's important to me that you're with us while we eat. Can I help
right.
you turn it off or can you turn it off? Oh, I'll turn it off.
Wow. That's such a different way to approach this, than just like, okay, the timer went off. You need to get off. And then we start telling them sometimes about, oh, you're getting addicted. It's not good for you, whatever. All of that stuff that's like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter because it feels good for them to play, but then we're not focusing on the connection, like what you just said. We want to have a meal with you. I want to spend time with you. You're important. I want your presence. Like that is such a different way to approach that situation.
Yeah. And how do you feel when you feel that? Like, are you more likely to contribute to me or is it
Oh,
like, ew, I don't want to be with you?
yeah, like, oh, yeah, if you're taking the things that I enjoy away from me and then making me feel
Yeah.
bad for it, like I'm not able to control myself, or we blame them, or instead, like, we're taking the responsibility, helping them through that, and then nurturing that connection. I would much rather be with this kind of parent, and I think it
Yeah.
would make me feel so much better, that even if it doesn't feel good to move away from what I want, but at least I still feel good about being with you.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you said that because exactly like you're saying, if we're taking away what they're enjoying,
Hmm.
do they even want to spend time with us? We become
Yeah.
this like villain, right? It's
Yeah.
opposites. It's us against you. There's a winner and a loser. And that's not what we want. We
Yeah.
want our family to be team family. We talk about that all the time in our family. This is team family. How can we
Mm.
all win?
Wow. This is beautiful. Team family. I like that. I like that. And I feel like I've gotten some more even ideas talking to you about how to approach, tricky situations and nurturing that connection, making when the child feels good, they're more likely to behave better. They're more likely to respond to us. They're more likely to listen to us than when we make them feel bad or punish them or, use fear-based methods, which doesn't leave them feeling good. And then it creates this connection. And that is when you get to the teenage years and you have no influence over them and then they don't trust you. They don't even know how to trust themselves. So there is it's a whole thing that it's kind of like a domino effect, starting with the relationship and connection.
Exactly. And the other part of the teenage brain that's so fascinating is the teenage brain is wired to connect with peers. So they start looking to their peers to fill any gaps that their parents
Mm,
have left. So if we don't
right.
get in there first and fill this gap of connection for them and help them know that, this is our place in your life, this is the place that you can always experience connection, then they start looking for, okay, how can I get this filled with my peers? And it creates some really unwanted behaviors because they're trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to connect with my peers? Do I need to talk a certain way, walk a certain way, wear certain
Right.
clothes, do certain things I wouldn't normally do? But I need this gap of connection filled with my peers.
Mm, right.
They're going to look for peer connection regardless. Like that's part of the teenage brain.
Yeah,
Like that they
absolutely.
need to break away from mom and dad. But if they also have this wound that they've never felt filled up with connection,
Yeah.
then their peers are also filling in that gap of that wound. And that's where their behavior starts to get really dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The goal, yes, we want them to connect and be social and have their own social relationship with their peers, but we don't want them to be looking for love and for acceptance and connection with peers. I mean, their brains are not mature yet, so you're looking for that connection with an immature brain. You're never going to get it. Yeah, I love that. Dr. Neufeld talks a lot about that peer relationships, and that's why parents need to matter, or the caregivers, whoever is taking care of the child. So nurturing that connection. So I love that. I think you've given us a lot of and you've given parents a lot of things to think about, how we communicate, the importance of relationships, honoring our needs, and also figuring out the needs of the child, because every behavior has a need under it. So I feel like I'm going to go back and listen to this to this chat, and there's so many nuggets. Um, do you have, if a parent want to learn more about nonviolent communication or how they can use it in their daily life, like where would you think is a good place for them to start?
So I lead a Facebook group called RIE and NVC Harmony.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
I'll put that in the description.
yeah,
Oh,
and
that's nice.
then I post things on Instagram at Harmony Parenting Love is my handle.
That's great. And you also work with parents online and in
Hmm.
person? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
so that is also a
exactly.
great place. So you can um, read on Holly's website or follow her and on Facebook, or are you also on Instagram?
I am. Yeah,
Also on
at
Instagram.
Harmony Parenting Love on both Facebook and Instagram. And then my website is www.hollystorm.com. And if anybody wants to connect, I'm more than happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much for this kind of communication that I feel like we're just scratching the surface. Like we're only talking like kind of like bringing awareness into what needs to happen. But I know that coming from our own patterns, how we were communicated with as kids and how we communicate in our daily life, like changing that pattern of even using the word should, or that's what you have to do, or you need to clean up your plates right now. Changing those patterns is not easy. It is a long process and it does require a lot of reflection on what we're doing, and also finding out, well, what is my need? Why am I saying this? Why am I even requesting the stuff? So it is a long process, but it's very rewarding. I know when I learned about nonviolent communication, I think my son was like seven years old at the time when I listened to the book, and it really changed it. It just changed a lot of how I started communicating with him. But it is a process. So I think I was in and out of that process because it's so easy to go back into old pattern, or, everybody talks this way. So you start talking that way. And it's like, oh, I need to remember this is not the best way to be barking orders at my kids, or, maybe this is not, I'm not really searching deep enough for what the need is. So I don't think you can learn this in just like one session or one thing. It is a process, but it is such a rewarding process because even listening to you can feel how much peace it brings into ourselves, just having those realizations, and also creating that safe space for ourselves and our kids where there is connection, there's love, there's communication, we understand each other. And it's such a beautiful thing, I think, to have that in the family.
Yeah, it's truly a paradigm shift and an energy shift. It really, like you said, brings so much connection and love
Yeah.
instead
Yeah.
of that strife that and division that there can be.
And I can just imagine like how much nicer our society and communities would be when we learn to communicate this way with each other. Like when teachers start communicating this way with kids, when parents start communicating this way with each other, it is just it is really something that we need more of. I think there are so many, sometimes we focus on the differences so much, or we want our uniqueness and identity, and then we don't focus on the connection and the things that bring us together. So I feel like this kind of communication is just it's something that we need, and it is, yeah, it's just so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Holly, for having this chat and talking about nonviolent communication, and how to nurture that connection with our kids. Do you have any final thoughts, or any asks for parents who are listening to this?
Hmm. I just I would love them to consider studying it, learning about it. There's lots and lots of resources. So if not with me, just at least going to the local library and getting the Nonviolent Communication: A Way of Life, getting the book and just starting somewhere, and know that you don't have to jump in with both feet. It's okay to start slow, and I
Mm-hmm.
just hold a lot of hope and encouragement and excitement, actually, for any parent that decides to make that choice, because there is such a wealth of opportunity ahead of you when you start on that journey.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I will put your links in the description, and I will encourage any parents who's interested in changing the way they communicate with their kids or with their family to follow you and reach out to you, and just research nonviolent communication. Thank you so
Thank
much, Holly, for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mia. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in another coffee break. Take care.